the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Welcome to August, party people. It is the month for fantasy football here, and we are your home for everything high stakes fantasy football season long and what have you right here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Thanks for joining us. We'll be rocking this party until 9 o'clock Eastern time. Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds will take over from us after that. Thanks so much for following on social media at Better Network. My name is Eric Balkman. You know me from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. Follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman. Want to welcome in our guest host for this evening. You know him from FantasyPros, Razball, and then Nate Polvogt, by the way. So number one, I got the name right?
You did. Right? Okay. You did.
And then number two, what's the Dynasty podcast you do with Razball?
So it's called Dynasty Diehards, which we're kind of rounding out for the year. It's been interesting. I've had a couple of different co-hosts, but I've settled in with my boy Matt Chester. We're loving it. We're having a blast. We're testing out new things, new segments, new ways to present Dynasty information to maybe people who are a little intimidated by the format. Because I can tell you, I was intimidated when I started. So
me too.
We want to make it easy for people to get into the format and to build good teams and not be afraid to have fun with it.
I know we're going to have fun tonight as Nate joins me. We're going to talk a lot about the FantasyPros Championship. We're going to go around the world, or not around the world, but around the nation with all the NFL training camp news. We're going to get into the latest on some goings on with some NFL running backs, including but not limited to Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, and Alvin Kamara. And then in the second hour, I think what we'll do is we'll do another Where Do You Stand segment with Nate. Nate's thoughts on guys like Derrick Henry, DK Metcalf, Jared Goff. And then we will talk some targets and fades in the final segment of the program tonight. Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Justin Herbert, Mark Andrews, among those in there as well. It is fantasy football night in America, as the Better Boss has just said. Us and then Garrett Price. I don't know how much Dynasty. We'll probably get into a little bit Dynasty tonight, Nate, with you, because I feel like we should pick your brain on that a little bit. But it'll be heavy Dynasty from 9 to 11 here on the Better Sports Network as well. Shout out to our producer, Anthony Rivera, the man behind the glass tonight. Remember, you can win a pair of $1 million grand prizes with the FFPC this year, whether it's the FFPC main event, our flagship contest, that's paying out $1 million grand prize, or the FantasyPros Championship, a $1 million grand prize in that, and just $350 to enter that as well. Play fantasy football year-round with Dynasty Leagues at myffpc.com, 1,400 plus leagues over 10 plus years, and not a single one has ever folded. Check that out at myffpc.com. So let me kick this off, Nate, and this is some news that I saw, and I was kind of like, this is probably a nothing burger. And then the more I read about it, I'm like, okay, this is a thing with Cooper Kupp here. He's expected to miss a few weeks, had an MRI. He has a hamstring injury. Now, a few weeks is kind of nebulous, I guess. We would think that he's probably going to be out for all the preseason and then maybe come back for week one. I'm actually a little bit surprised in the FantasyPros ADP here. Cooper Kupp over the last 3 days still has an ADP of 106. He fell to 109 in a draft yesterday. I'm surprised he's not falling more to the end of the first round. Nate, should he be more of a late first round pick right now based on this injury, or are you not as concerned?
So here's where my concern comes in. Excuse me. These soft tissue injuries tend to linger, and the instance of re-injury is much higher. Now, Cooper Kupp's a really freak athletic person, right? Freak athletic wide receiver. So I'm a little bit less concerned, but I'm not taking him in the first half of the first round with this injury, because I'm afraid that there will be an instance of this lingering throughout the season. And maybe he misses 2 games here, misses a game there through the first half of the season. And that can crush you. If you're relying on Cooper Kupp as a first round pick and he misses 4 games early on in the season, that hurts. That hurts your team in general, because who are you going to back that up with? I'm okay taking him late first, early second, but I think anything before 108 right now with this injury, it's too early for him.
And the other thing, too, to keep in mind is, like, there's a lot of other really – I mean, we're not talking about, like, him sliding down multiple rounds where it's like, oh my goodness, the upside for Kupp, you have to take him here. We're talking about a lot of other talented players in that same neighborhood who, by the way, are healthy. Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill. Those are all guys who are healthy right now. And just that wide receiver. You know, you can also pivot and go to Eckler or Bijan Robinson or even Saquon Barkley, who's ascended quite a bit right now too. So that Kupp thing, and somebody was asking me about this today, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know why there hasn't been a dip. I saw some chatter on Twitter about it too. Like, why are we not seeing a discount on Cooper Kupp yet? And I'm ready to take the dip and buy the dip, excuse me, when it happens. But Nate, it clearly has not happened yet. Interesting quote from Dan Campbell, which I know that's like sort of like an evergreen headline. Interesting quote from Dan Campbell today at Lions Camp. But he said Jameson Williams will not have elite hands, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a dude who you drafted in the first round last year and you're counting on for big things in year 2 as he is, you know, no longer coming in with a torn ACL. He does have the gambling suspension. But he also said Williams is going to be okay because of his speed. What do we make of this as fantasy players for Jameson Williams when you consider drafting him, which his ADP right now in the FantasyPros Championship is currently at, I just had it.
I just had it pulled up too.
Wide receiver 49. 1004 right now is where he's going in that. So he's kind of on an island by himself because you're looking at Quentin Johnston about a round before him, and then you're looking at Rashad Bateman almost a full round after him. There's no other really receivers that are going in that early 10th round range right now. But what do you make of this from Dan Campbell that he's never going to have elite hands? I mean, are we really going to invest a 9th or a 10th round pick into a guy whose coach doesn't even believe he can catch that well?
The speed's one thing. You love to see it. If the guy's someone who they're going to use like LaVisca or Debo, that's clearly not what Dan Campbell wants out of this kid. He wants him to be a wide receiver. Basically what I heard there was this kid's not breaking any records, which tells me at most he might be a high-end wide receiver too at some point in his career. But if you look at the other talent in this offense, it's kind of hard to see a path to that. You know, they got Jahmyr Gibbs, who is a talented pass-catching back. David Montgomery is no slouch catching passes. And then you've got Amon-Ra and the rookie Sam Laporta, who's impressed Dan Campbell in camp. And the other problems he had in camp, he got into a fight in camp. It was talked about that he's really looked like he hasn't been focusing until recently in camp. Those things concern me because you wonder if he really cares about progressing or if he's there for a paycheck, which we've seen with guys like Jamarcus Russell. And I'm not comparing him necessarily to Jamarcus Russell, but at that value, there are still other players I'd rather have. I'd rather have Rashad Bateman, quite honestly, than have Jameson Williams, especially considering he's missing the first game of the 6 games. And to take him in the 10th round, that's still a starting value in the 10th round. And I think that's a reach. I think it's a reach on the guy that might not do anything this year.
What do you make of Jameson Williams in Dynasty? If you're nervous about him for redraft, would you be willing to take 80 cents on the dollar in exchange to ship Jameson Williams up? And I don't know how much exposure you have to him from a Dynasty aspect either, Nate.
I have quite a bit, but I have him in a place where I can keep him on my taxi this year.
Okay.
Wait and see what happens. So from that standpoint, I'm okay holding him. I'm not going to try and move him really, because if he does go off once he comes back and all this stuff in camp is just an aberration and he really does work on his handwork and he becomes a better pass catcher. If I'm just taxiing him, why would I sell him?
Right. Yeah.
Now, if you've got him sitting on your active roster because you're expecting him to do something, in that case, yes, I'll take 80 cents on the dollar.
Okay.
For sure.
All right. That's interesting too. And this is coming from a guy who you have him in a bunch of leagues too, which this is not to, like, say I do not have Jameson Williams in a whole lot of spots. And I was actually kind of ticked off. I missed on him in so many leagues last year. And I was like, God, maybe I should look at acquiring him. And then, with the stuff that you cited, I'm kind of like, this is probably not the right, there's plenty of guys I can try to focus on getting on my dynasty teams. Jameson Williams, probably not one of them. Let's talk about the Ravens receivers here. You just mentioned Odell Beckham or Rashad Bateman. I'm about to mention Odell Beckham. You just mentioned Rashad Bateman. That you'd actually rather have him in redraft this year over Jameson Williams. Now, Odell Beckham apparently has been showing out in Ravens camp. We've heard a lot of really positive things about Zay Flowers as well. When we started FFPC drafts, this was like January, February, and even let's start after that. Let's talk about after the draft, after the NFL draft, when Flowers was on the team, Beckham was on the team, and Bateman was on the team. These guys were all kind of tightly bunched up, right? In rounds 9, rounds 10. Like, and I'm talking, when I say tightly bunched, within a half round of each other. Now you look at it, Zay Flowers is an early 9th round pick. Rashad Bateman is going to be a late 10th round pick, so about 2 rounds difference there. And then you're looking at Odell Beckham about a half round after that in the early to mid 11th round. So they're still kind of tightly bunched, although Flowers has, vaulted forward over the other 2 so far. Where do you stand on the Ravens receivers this year? Is Flowers a guy you want to be in business with in the early 9th round, or would you rather wait and then maybe grab Bateman or Beckham later?
You don't know what you just did, because I have been a Zay Flowers guy from the moment Baltimore drafted him. With his Todd Monken offense, if you look at what he's done in the past in the NFL, he was the offensive coordinator when Jameis Winston threw for 5,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 30 picks. Mm-hmm. That was an aired out offense. You've got Lamar Jackson, who has a big arm. He can get the ball down the field, something Greg Roman just didn't want to do. He wanted to run the ball. We're seeing the issue with J.K. Dobbins now. They're not going to have a solid backfield. Dobbins wants more money. He's going to be a pain throughout the season, I feel like, for this team. I think he's going to see less work. This is a team where Lamar Jackson might throw for 5,000 yards. And Zay Flowers is the guy who's going to I think he's going to lead the team in targets. I think it'll be Flowers, then Andrews, then Beckham, then Bateman. Is kind of how I feel like it's shaping out.
Flowers, Andrews, Beckham, okay.
If Beckham can stay healthy. If he stays on the field, I think there's still something there in this offense. I think there's enough work to go around. There's enough other talent where he's not going to draw the marquee coverage every time he's on the field like he has in the past. And that's going to open him up. This is an exciting offense in general to me. I want in on Lamar at cost right now. We're seeing him go in the middle of the first round in Superflex, which is fine with me.
Yeah.
I think that we might look back and say, he probably should have been our second or third pick. I think there's a world in which that could happen.
What about I'm kind of curious here. Why do you, of all these talented receivers, and we know there's a bunch more talent in as far as pass catchers go in Baltimore this year, is Flowers that good that you're going to say, hey, Balky, this dude is a rookie, is going to lead this Ravens, and we're not saying this in jest anymore, vaunted passing attack with Todd Monken there. Is it because of the Monken factor? Why is a rookie going to lead him in targets this season?
Because I think he's the most talented wide receiver on the team.
And tight end. You're including Andrews in that too, right?
Well, Andrews, I think, leads the team in targets. I think Flowers is second. Yes.
Okay. All right.
He's the most talented wide receiver on this team. Odell Beckham in his prime was probably more talented. We don't know. We haven't seen Zay Flowers in an NFL game. But I really do believe that the connection is there. Lamar wanted him. That's why they took him with that pick in the first round. And this connection is just going to grow throughout the season. I think Zay Flowers could be 1,000-yard guy this season. Pretty easily, honestly.
Wow. Okay. And you can get that in the 9th round of the FantasyPros Championship.
Exactly.
So make sure you're taking a look at that. Are you out on Beckham then? Where do you sort of stand on that? Like if Bateman's chosen, Flowers is chosen, would you look at Beckham the 11th round?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, 11th round, I'd have no problem.
Just basically any kind of piece of this Baltimore offense, you need to take a long, hard look at.
The passing game specifically.
The passing game. Okay.
I'm not excited about the running back situation, but I don't think anybody is.
Do we have Dobbins on the show sheet tonight? I'm kind of curious. We do not.
We do not.
So perfect. Let's talk about him right now, because Dobbins is a guy that is on the PUP list. I've heard reports of holding in right now, that he could be holding in and not practicing. I thought he gave the owner like a hug at practice either today or yesterday or something. So I'm not really sure what to make of it. And when you consider that if you want J.K. Dobbins on your team, Nate, you got to invest a mid-6th round pick on him. He's running back 22 right now. Is it worth taking a chance on Dobbins? Because you are getting a discount on him right now. But you also don't know exactly what's going on in Baltimore. And John Harbaugh hasn't been any help as we try to figure out what's going on there, when Dobbins is going to be back out there.
Well, classic Harbaugh family, right? Tight-lipped to the media, don't help at all. I'm kind of out on Dobbins at any value. Unless he slips to like that 10th, 11th, 12th round, I still think even the 6 is too early for him. I don't know that he's even going to be an RB2 tier player this season in this offense specifically, because they want to throw the ball. And the running back's Lamar Jackson. He's the RB1 in this offense. So what you're asking Dobbins to do is to be fantasy relevant in a pass-heavy attack where he's not even the lead running back.
Oof. So let me ask you this. You're out on Dobbins, which is fine. But if that's the case then, and you don't want in on him, is there value with Gus Edwards, Keaton Mitchell, Melvin Gordon? Is there value with any of these guys late? Because Edwards is going in the 15th. The other two guys are in the 18th and 19th round. They're basically free. Is it worth taking a shot on either? Because if you don't like Dobbins, you would think that you should like one of these other guys at their current cost.
So if I'm drafting right now, I'm taking Gordon at that deep discount because he's the most talented pass catching back in that running back core, right? And if this is going to be a pass heavy offense, he might be the guy that gets those looks, gets those targets on passing downs. And if that's the case, PPR points are valuable in these leagues because you're tacking on yards as well. And I think that this is an offense where we could see Melvin Gordon not be the marquee back, but be one of those like Jerick McKinnon type guys, like what happened in Kansas City last season, where we see him really start to gel with Lamar towards the end of the season. If you're getting him in the 18th round, you can probably afford to wait to see what happens with him. If by week 3 or 4, he's not on the field at all, he's got like a 5% snap share, you can drop him, but you're getting him in the 18th or 19th round. So right. Yeah, I think Gordon is a guy who's probably worth a flyer because you never know.
Yeah, that's the point. Like there's these guys every single year that just come out of nowhere. And Gordon is actually, he has got the track record of doing it before. This is not like trying to think of a good example of like some hyped up running back that never lived up to it in
Malik Davis.
Malik Davis to a certain point, although I'm still willing to give him a shot this year. But I'm trying to think of somebody in the past that like everybody was on in preseason as like this sleeper running back and then just never developed. I think about like what Isaiah Pacheco, what he should have been last year, where everybody got so hyped up and then he just falls flat on his face. He didn't. He was hyped up for a good reason last year. And I know people are looking for this year's Pacheco as well. We might get into that in the second hour. Let's talk about the Washington passing game, which is very, very close in proximity to the Baltimore passing game. Jahan Dotson has actually had a really good training camp this first week for the Commanders. And according to John Keim, who covers the Commanders for ESPN, he thinks Dotson's actually in for a pretty big season. Now, I normally am of the opinion where if I don't like a certain player, but I hear so many other, pundits or people in the industry hype him up, that's when I kind of revisit. I'm like, okay, well, why don't I like this guy again? Am I wrong on him? And Dotson was one of those guys where the voices became louder, the print became more capital letters when I'm reading about him. And I was kind of like, okay, maybe I'm wrong on Dotson. Maybe he's worth it. And when you consider Jahan Dotson's ADP right now in FantasyPros Championship drafts, wide receiver 37 in the 8th round. So technically, in a 12-team league, he is a number 4 receiver. Okay, I can get on board with that. Then I was listening to somebody say today, well, they would never have Dotson on their team. And he basically summed it up in this sentence, and it made perfect sense to me. I don't want the number 2 wideout on a Sam Howell run offense. Which, when you say it like that, it's like, why would I ever be in on this guy? But we kind of don't know. And like Ron Rivera kind of coyly said, don't sleep on Jacoby Brissett as a quarterback this year. And we know Brissett's actually pretty capable. And for a guy like him to come out to have McLaurin on one side and Dotson on the other side, I think he can make those guys produce. So now I'm kind of like, I don't know, with Dotson, like if it's Sam Howell, yeah, it's tough for me to get excited, but the price, wide receiver 37, I can sink an 8th round pick into him. If I miss on him, Nate, I'm probably not going to lose my league, but I kind of would like a couple of shares of Dotson, I think, this year. So
recency bias is so funny to me because we're all remembering Sam Howell getting drafted in, what was it, the 4th or 5th round?
I think it was 4th round.
4th round. But before that college season started leading up to the draft, Sam Howell was pretty much the consensus number 1 pick in the draft. People were saying not only is he the best quarterback in this draft, he's the best player in this draft.
My mistake, he was a 5th round pick. I'm sorry.
5th round pick. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not as worried about Howell. I think that if Howell actually is the starter, if Rivera feels like he's ready, he's ready. And I think he had a season to sit. I mean, granted, it was behind Carson Wentz and Taylor Heineke. But nonetheless, if Rivera trusts him, I'm okay with it because Dotson's talent is phenomenal. And as long as Howell can get the ball close to him, he's going to make catches, and he does so much after the catch that is dynamic. I'm really high on Dotson. I was high on Dotson when he was drafted. I was high on Dotson before the draft. I figured wherever he landed, he was going to be a marquee piece. And I think this is where we see it. I think this is where we see Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin be maybe in the conversation of one of the best 1-2 combos in the league, if everything goes the way I think it could go this season, even if it's Jacoby Brissett or if it's Sam Howell. I really don't care. As long as it's not Carson Wentz. Just keep Carson Wentz away from those guys. But yeah, I have a lot of shares of Dotson in Dynasty. I'll probably have a fair amount in redraft this year too.
Do you think, because last year I remember Dotson kind of slipped a little bit in rookie Dynasty drafts. Excuse me, Nate. And I wonder, number one, because of the landing spot, I'm sure he did. But I'm kind of curious, do you think that he is being undervalued? Maybe, I mean, obviously because of the Howell thing, but is he undervalued this year a little bit too? Because we just, for whatever reason, did not like the fit of Dotson to the Commanders. And I say we as the Dynasty community. Now that's bleeding over to redraft. Like, this guy deserves more respect than he's getting. And it started even before he took a snap with the Commanders in a real NFL game, because we're all kind of like, oh, Dotson, first round pick. That's great. Commanders, no quarterback. McLaurin there. I'm out on him. And now I feel like the redrafted price is you're still getting the discount because of that.
So, yes, I have a lot of friends who are Commanders fans that when they pick Dotson, they're also big fantasy football people. Mm-hmm. And when they pick Dotson, they're like, no, don't ruin this guy's career sending him to Washington. That was, of course, before we knew that Dan Snyder was going to be on the way out. And I think that there's some fear around this franchise right now because Ron Rivera seems like he's kind of checked out. Like he's not in touch with the current NFL. Seems like it might be time for him to move on. This is a make or break year for him. So he's got to win. But I don't think there's a lot of faith around the NFL that he can win. Plus, you've got new ownership coming in. Now we've got talks of a team name change. Even with Dan Snyder out, things are still real tumultuous in Washington right now. And that can translate into a poor locker room where you've got guys that just, they're not feeling it. The team isn't feeling it. It's just negative energy in the locker room. And I think people are afraid of that. But I think this new ownership group actually gives this team some hope. I think that there's some freedom with Rivera to where Dan Snyder was such a meddler and everything. And now Rivera can actually coach this team. So maybe he's not washed. Maybe he is more connected than we thought. We're going to find out. But I'm willing to take a risk on Dotson because I think that the possible reward is so high. It's worth it to me.
And the price is so low. I mean,
it's so low.
8th round pick, So I think that makes perfect sense there. We've been talking a lot of wide receivers here. I want to switch over to the tight end position. And a player, this is another guy that I'm actually a little bit surprised that he has not, because obviously the FantasyPros Championship, FFPC leagues, they're all tight end premium. And when I saw Buffalo, an elite offense, trade up for this guy in the to get him in the first round, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like Kyle Pitts 2.0. Everybody's going to go crazy on him because of the matchup nightmare that he is, and then the Bills saying they want to use him in the as more of a receiver in the slot more so than an inline tight end. Like, oh my goodness, these are all the keywords that FFPC players love to hear, and yet he is not going high as I thought. The news today from Pat McAfee, he's going to be using 12 personnel sets with Dawson Knox. That's something, according to the Bills GM, that they're going to do a lot this season. So more positive news about Dalton Kincaid here, Nate. And yet I look at the ADP for the FantasyPros Championship, and Dalton Kincaid is only tight end 11. You can get him in the 10th round right now. What am I missing here? I mean, have these FFPC owners finally found a way to control themselves and settle down and not overdraft a potential life-changing tight end here for their fantasy teams? Are we onto that, or am I missing something here that maybe Kincaid, his rookie year, is not going to be all rainbows and unicorns?
So, Eric, this is what the medical community calls Kyle Pitts syndrome. Mm-hmm. We all got bit because we all looked at Kyle Pitts the same way we're looking at Dalton Kincaid, right? Like, oh no, they're going to use this dude as a wide receiver. They're going to use this dude as a wide receiver. He's going to be a wide receiver. And then tight end 8 in a really weak tight end field in 2022 or 2021. Then in 2022, he just didn't produce. Now, what people are missing is that Kyle Pitts was in an offense with an over-the-hill Matt Ryan and then Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder last season. Of course he wasn't going to produce. And this is an Arthur Smith offense that just wants to pound the ball. They showed that by getting Bijan Robinson when Tyler Algier was more than adequate last season, right? Like almost 1,000-yard rusher, played really, really well, looked good in that offensive scheme. They've still got Cordarrelle Patterson, and now they've got Bijan. So they're just going to run the ball. Now, this is the Bills. The Bills have a rushing problem. They've got James Cook and Damian Harris. James Cook is more of a pass-catching back. Damian Harris is what Damian Harris is, right? When you think of Damian Harris, you don't get excited about the prospect of Damian Harris. So this is going to be a pass-first offense again. And Dalton Kincaid is basically what we wanted Kyle Pitts to be in an offense that Kyle Pitts should have been in to begin with. That highlights you've got Stephon Diggs, you've got Gabe Davis, which obviously he's a very divisive player in any fantasy format. Is this Gabe Davis year every year? And it never will be, especially with Dalton Kincaid. And they've still got Khalil Shakur, who looked really good at stints last season. I think that Dalton Kincaid is going to be fine. I think Dalton Kincaid is basically the wide receiver 2 on this team heading into the season, and he showed it in camp. I mean, the guy's catching everything. It's insane. He's like a human flytrap. Anything near him.
And if that's the case, we have always – I preach this even in non-tight end premium leagues, Nate, that I want to get an elite tight end. Like if I can get a top 4 or 5 tight end early, I feel like it makes my team so much better. But I always say if you can't get like a top 4 or 5, then you want to wait until like that 9, 10, 11, 12, even through 15. And I have some people telling me this year, like you can even wait further than that as long as you double up on them and you can get like 2 top 20 guys and you might be okay because tight end is deeper this year. But I guess the point I want to make here is if this is the case that Kincaid's going to be all right, that he's going to be the number 2 pass catcher for an elite offense that is going to put up a lot of points, that has a super talented quarterback, then you got to be jumping all over him at the 10-1 in a tight end premium league. Like if people watch this tonight and we sign off at 9:00 and the viewers are like, God, if there's one thing I should have taken away from that, what should it be? It should probably be to draft Dalton Kincaid in the 10th round.
100%.
I think you and I are both of the same mind on this.
Yes, no, 100%. In the 10th round, get Dalton Kincaid and then stack him with a guy like, I don't know, Mike Gesicki, Jawan Johnson, guys who are going like 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th rounds. Then you've got 2 really solid tight ends.
You could actually, and I'll tell you this too, you could technically, if you wanted to go crazy, because you're trying to win $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship, you go rookie. And we saw this in Pros versus Joes, the FFPC Pros versus Joes last couple weeks. Somebody ended up waiting on tight end and they got Kincaid and Laporta, which I think there's a lot of risk to that, but that has blow up potential too with Kincaid and Laporta. Or you can get a guy like David Njoku. Well, actually, Njoku's going a little bit. He's going 1 tight end slot ahead of Kincaid.
Right.
But there's nothing that says you can't go Njoku and then Kincaid. Njoku in the 9th and then Kincaid in the 10th.
Right.
So I think there's a, we wouldn't, and I think, Nate, you're agreeing with me on this. I would never say, hey, just go with Dalton Kincaid as your only tight end this year. You still want to get somebody else on the squad, but nothing wrong with having Kincaid as your number 1 tight end. Speaking of tight ends, let's talk about Hunter Henry here a little bit. And I know people are probably vomiting in their mouths, like, oh, God, these guys are dedicating airtime talking about Hunter Henry. Yes, we are. Hunter Henry has apparently been Mac Jones's favorite target in the red zone in Patriots training camp so far. And Hunter Henry actually lost a few LBs this offseason, coming into camp lighter, and it looks like he's playing faster. I don't necessarily want to put a whole lot of emphasis on that because I think the weight gain, the weight loss, that's a little bit overrated.
Sure.
But at the same time, Hunter Henry, tight end 29 in the 17th round. I know people are very, very excited about Mike Gesicki coming to New England, but as a number 2 or number 3 tight end, this is what we're talking about, this 3rd tier of tight ends. I think Hunter Henry fits the bill here. Where do you stand on Henry as a late round flyer?
Well, I like it. And I like both of these guys as late round flyers. Bill O'Brien, people forget, was the offensive coordinator when Gronk and Aaron Hernandez both finished as top 10 tight ends. That's how he likes to run his offenses. Tight end heavy, a lot of targets to tight ends, which I think suits Mac Jones' playing style. We could very well be looking at another 2 Patriot tight end finish in the top 10 this season. I think it's absolutely reasonable. What people seem to forget, so 2022 wasn't super friendly to Hunter Henry. He finished as tight end 22. Not great, right? But In 2021, he was a PPR tight end 10. He had 9 touchdowns. 9 touchdowns. And if he is now Mac Jones' favorite red zone target,
could be a lot more than 9. Could be more than 9.
Yeah, he'll have a lot more than 9. A lot more than 9.
The other thing too, and I do want to talk a little bit about the game coming up tonight because I do have some news on it here. But Hunter Henry is a guy that wasn't there another really talented tight end? And I'm blanking on it right now. Wasn't there another really talented tight end when he was in San Diego or Los Angeles or whatever it was alongside him? I feel like when he was with the Chargers, there was another tight end there that was getting a lot of run on the offense with Phillip Rivers. And then he goes to New England, and Jonnu Smith was the prize free agent signing there. And then they get Gesicki again. So it's like Hunter Henry's always sort of been the guy behind the guy, but he always seemed to put up numbers, right? And this is another instance where you're not getting – I mean, this is Hunter Henry's floor at this point. You're getting him as tight end 29. There's nothing wrong with that. No harm, no foul. Grab him late. See what happens because that Patriots offense, man, there's so many unknowns this year. And if you get it right and you get one of these late round picks right, it could be all the difference in the world. Okay, so we do have the Hall of Fame game tonight going on. We have some news here from – I'm trying to get the source here. I apologize. Zach Rosenblatt said that the 3 Giants running backs tonight that are playing are Damari Crockett, Travis Dye, and Izzy Abanikanda. Jeremy Ruckert not going to be playing, but the analytics wunderkind at the Combine, Zach Kuntz, will be playing tonight. But I think the guy we want to talk about here, and we're excited to see, is Izzy Abanikanda, right, Nate?
Oh, I love Izzy. I love his running style. He's just so incredibly talented. I may or may not have done half an episode just talking about him with C.H. Herms from Draft Sharks.
He's been on this program before. Absolutely.
Herms is my dude. He bought me this jersey.
A lot of guys
had it shipped to me.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
We're
if I could talk about Herms for a second, every time I bring that name up, everybody's always like, "Oh, that guy's awesome." Oh, I love that. He's hilarious. I love that guy. His analysis is great. His delivery is fantastic. Literally, he's everybody's best friend. But keep going here, Nate.
Yeah. So we talked about Abanikanda at length and how much we just love the skill set. And it really hurt my heart to see him go to the Jets because I wanted him to have the opportunity to be a feature back. We don't know what's going to happen with Breece Hall. We don't know if he's going to start the season. Sounds like he's probably going to start the season. But I feel like Abanikanda is good enough, and we'll see tonight. We'll find out tonight. But I feel like he's good enough to be kind of part of a 1-2 punch with Hall. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where the league is going anyway. Derrick Henry is about the only bell cow back left. Even Christian McCaffrey isn't necessarily the hands-down RB1 in San Francisco. They've got Elijah Mitchell to help him out. I think Abanikanda could have RB2 flex value. I think there's a chance. He's a talented pass-catching back, which I like. Maybe he's the Aaron Jones to Breece Hall being the A.J. Dillon with a little bit more talent. I mean, that could very well be what this offense is setting up to do. Nathaniel Hackett's the offensive coordinator. They drafted this kid for a reason. They know he's talented. So I'll be curious to see how he does tonight.
Israel Abanikanda, running back 67 at the 1703, basically free right now. And keep in mind, if he does make a couple of splash plays tonight, that would obviously make his ADP go up. And the other thing to consider here is the possibility of Dalvin Cook joining the Jets. Obviously, that would change how we feel about Abanikanda as well. Not necessarily the talent, but the role could change if Dalvin Cook comes aboard. We are just off and running here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show tonight. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about Jonathan Taylor, Ramondre Stevenson, James Cook, Najee Harris, a bunch of running back stuff with Nate Polvogt from Fantasy Pros and Razzball. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. You're watching the Better Sports Network.
The Detroit Lions select Sam Laporta, tight end, Iowa.
Had to go with your boy Sam Laporta there to pair with TJ Hawkinson.
Sammy, I couldn't double down on rookie tight ends. I think that would take it. That's taking it a little too far.
This could be one of the most exciting rookie tight end classes in a while, just based on the archetypes of these guys, of the Dalton Kincaids and the Sam Laportas. Obviously, Green Bay drafted 2 themselves. With Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So after Kincaid, I would say is probably the consensus with tight ends. Like, who do you like as far as a best ball, like an end of best ball Do you like Laporta, or is there anybody else you like more?
I do like Laporta. We're looking for guys that can be a top 2 target on their team. So any path, any argument you could make, right? So you can make the argument that Dalton Kincaid is going to be a top 2 target with after Stephon Diggs. You can make an argument that with Jamison Williams suspended, now Sam Laporta is just going to play straight up wide receiver. He looks like a wide receiver. Why can't he line up out wide at split end, right? It's like Marvin Jones and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would also throw another name in the ring, and I don't mind, since we're doing this for the fans, for the kids. He's still on the board. Luke Musgrave on your Packers. They're not super loaded at wide receiver. We like the guy Reed they drafted, but you never know. So why can't Luke Musgrave be a big slot? In fact, they drafted 2 tight ends, Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Tucker Kraft is more of an inline guy. They might just go 2 tight ends right away. Tucker Kraft inline, Luke Musgrave in the slot. Why can't he be a target monster for Jordan Love? So those are the guys, those are the conditions that you need for a rookie tight end to succeed. They need to not only be the best pass catching tight end on the team, but a top 2 pass catcher on the team outright. That's how you get Kyle Pitts. Evan Ingram as a rookie was top 5 because Odell Beckham Jr. hurt his knee 4 weeks into the year. So that's the formula. We're looking for guys that can actually be a top target right away. Otherwise, we're playing the sit and wait long-term game, which is what you're doing with guys like Michael Mayer.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
"24 minutes until the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He is Nate Polvogt from Razzball and FantasyPros. Hey, Hall of Fame game. It's tonight. It's all happening. To quote Penny Lane from Almost Famous. To celebrate the return of the NFL with tonight's Hall of Fame game, Fantasy Alarm is running a flash sale for today only. Get the 2023 Fantasy Football Guide when you use promo code ITSBACK. That's ITSBACK. Get it for half price with that code ITSBACK. Get your guide for 50% off today when you use promo code ITSBACK at checkout. Draft Guide is a living guide, constantly updated, going up until week 1. You can start actually a free 7-day trial of Fantasy Alarm All-Pro and get everything Fantasy Alarm has to offer, including free access to the Draft Guide. Get the Draft Guide half off or go All-Pro and get the Draft Guide free with your 7-day trial. Just go to fantasyalarm.com/draft now. fantasyalarm.com/draft. How many drafts have you done so far this year, Nate?
Probably in the 35 to 40 range.
Oh, my goodness. Are these a lot of best balls, or how many are managed?
We've got about 10 best ball. Rest are managed.
Wow.
Rest are dynasty, like rookie drafts.
Good,
I'm in a startup right now with some buddies. Just joined a league with my buddy Mike Stoyanov. So I'm always looking for new leagues, man.
Right? Yeah.
I think I'm capping myself right now. The rest of it's just best ball. I can't manage any more leagues.
Yeah, it's set it and forget it, right? I think the thing that for me, I've fluctuated over the years where I'll go into a period where I want to get in as many leagues as possible. Then 3 or 4 years later, I'm like, God, I got to cut way back. Like when I got married and had kids, I cut way back. And then I was ballooning up again. Well, now we're getting busier with the FFPC and there's more work on my plate. And now I'm like cutting back again. It's just,
exactly.
Crazy. It's like an ebb and flow thing. But man, if I had my druthers, I want to be in every league. You know what I mean? I can't get enough of it. Jonathan Taylor seemingly would like to play on just about any team other than the Colts right now. And according to Ian Rappaport, he's drawing a lot of trade interest. Now, Jim Irsay has already said we are not trading Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor and his agent seem, to put it nicely, nonplussed with Jim Irsay and the Indianapolis Colts right now. Now, this is a guy we have seen a dip in. Unlike Cooper Kupp, the Cooper Kupp injury, we have seen a dip with Jonathan Taylor. Guy who was going at the 101, the 102 last year, Nate. Then this year, when we kicked off drafts at the FFPC in January, it was like 108, 109. Now he's fallen all the way to the 212 because of the uncertainty concerning him and the contract situation and the potentially that the Colts might NFI him, which would withhold money from him, which is probably not the way to go as far as trying to mend the fence here or mend the bridge between Taylor and the Colts. How do you handle him in drafts? Here's the thing. You could start off a draft with Justin Jefferson at the 101. And then, man, if Jonathan Taylor is staring you in the face at the 212, do you have to hop on it? Or Is the dip going to come? Is it going to be a bigger dip? Is he going to fall further before he starts bottoming out at his ADP?
Well, so first I'm going to say what everybody else is thinking. Jim Irsay is the worst owner in the league. Now that we've gotten rid of Dan Snyder's gone,
yeah,
Jim Irsay is the worst owner in the league. And this situation is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Jim Irsay's comments were absolute trash. Like saying nobody cares about me, nobody cares about you. Like such an odd mindset to have as an NFL owner. And when you're paying all these guys to play for you and they're making you money, like, yeah, they are important. And the reason I bring this up is because if I'm Jonathan Taylor, I'm done in Indy.
Yeah.
I'm not playing for Jim Irsay. I'm not playing for someone who disrespected me that much. And before this happened, I was already kind of down on Jonathan Taylor because historically you don't see running backs do well with mobile quarterbacks. And all signs are pointing towards Anthony Richardson starting from week 1. He's getting all the first team reps. I think he's gotten them 3 days in a row now. Minshew's not seeing any first team reps. And it's not like Minshew is a seasoned veteran who has a ton of starts under his belt. If he's the guy you're rolling out, you're rolling him through those first team reps. And if it is Richardson, we're already going to see a downturn with Taylor, probably not RB33 like we saw last season. I mean, and he missed 6 games. So when you miss 6 games, you're going to see a downturn. But his single game stats really weren't that impressive. He only had 4 touchdowns over 11 games. He only had 861 yards. And this is a guy who was the RB1 last season. Yeah. He wasn't that involved in the passing game. He saw a downturn in targets last season. All across the board, I'm concerned about Jonathan Taylor, and I think I'm passing on him at 212. I think there are guys in that range that I would rather take. There's too much uncertainty. And if he doesn't play, you're screwed.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
On a guy who's not going to play.
And normally I wouldn't ask this, but I think there are more and more people that are coming over to your line of thinking here on this, Nate. What is the sweet spot for Jonathan Taylor? At what point in a draft would you start to consider, okay, now he is worth the risk here? Is it somewhere in the mid to late third? Does he have to get to the fourth? Does he have to be in later to that? And the other thing to keep in mind too is as we get further and further into drafting season and closer to the season, and we don't have a resolution here, I feel like his ADP is just going to keep dropping.
Oh, 100% it'll keep dropping. I would say I need him in the 5th. That's round. A risk I'm willing to take. I've stocked up. I've already got my RB1 on my roster. He can be my RB2, and if he doesn't play, it's going to hurt. But I tend to draft more hero RB strategy where I go one big, then I wait until the 8th or 9th round to take another running back. If JT's sitting there in the 5th or 6th round, I would probably break from strategy and take him just because it's worth the risk. Because then you've got 2 RB1s on your roster, more than likely.
Yeah.
And I think if this situation isn't resolved in the next week or 2, we're going to start to see him drop to the 3rd, to the 4th, to the 5th.
That could be crazy. This is the slide nobody's talking about with Taylor right now. I think for people drafting in the FantasyPros Championship back in March and April, if you would have told them that, hey, if you wait till August, you can get Taylor at the 212, they would have said you're crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's bizarre how it's been going. And maybe he'll still, maybe they'll figure things out and he'll still return good value as a mid-first round pick. That could happen yet as well. But as you said, contract aside, Anthony Richardson probably still going to put a damper into what Jonathan Taylor can do for this team. Unlike Taylor, I think there's some positive news if you look between the lines, at least the way I'm seeing it, in New England for Ramondre Stevenson. 3 of the first 7 practices that Stevenson has had this year, he's been working out on a separate field as it seems New England wants to limit his workload in camp. Now, Doug, I'm going to butcher his name, Doug Kyed or Doug Keed, I'm not sure, covers the Patriots. He actually had their support. I think this is, and Stevenson does it himself. He was even asked, like, why are you missing all this time? He said, I don't know. So to me, that suggests he's healthy. But I think this is good in the fact that they had James Robinson. They let him go. They've worked out Leonard Fournette. They didn't sign him. Who's the other running back that New England recently worked out besides Fournette? There was another. Didn't
they bring Dalvin Cook? No, they didn't bring Dalvin.
There was rumors that Cook was going to sign.
He was going to be there.
He might have visited them, but I don't think he ever even worked out or anything for him. And I don't
think he worked out.
Okay, all right. So maybe he visited and then that was it, or the rumors were out there. But Fournette, and I feel like there is another guy. It wasn't Kareem Hunt, but it was a Kareem Hunt type guy, right? That worked out in New England. It doesn't matter. The point is they haven't signed anybody and they've gotten rid of James Robinson. So like we're looking at Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong there behind
Right.
Stevenson. And I think this is good news for Stevenson because the Patriots kind of know what he's going to have to do this for them this season. So they're already resting him now. And they still haven't found anybody to come into camp to challenge him for touches. Ramondre Stevenson right now at the 304, and that price has dropped. It was just a few days ago. He was in the early third, and now he's kind of fallen to the 304. Slight, I know, but this is a guy that should be going up in ADP and not down. What am I missing on Stevenson here?
I think people are apprehensive about the idea of Bill Belichick having a bell cow running back because we haven't seen it in a really long time. I think a lot of people feel like, okay, well, Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong, they looked serviceable last season. So these are guys that Belichick's going to use and cut into Stevenson's work. These people forget that Corey Dillon existed. Mm-hmm. Corey Dillon was a very talented runner who played initially for Cincinnati. In the 2 seasons he was in New England, the dude had I think he led the league in carries one year, I believe. We're going way back, but it's not unheard of for Belichick if he has a talented enough running back to use that running back as a bell cow back. Ramondre Stevenson is that guy. He had 210 carries last season, only 5 rushing touchdowns, but he also had 88 targets. He had 69 catches for 421 yards. And in PPR formats, even half PPR formats, that's insanely valuable. I think people are afraid that they're going to get burnt, that Belichick's not going to use him that much, that they're going to see Harrison Strong involved. And that's fine. Keep sleeping on him because I'll just keep taking him at that value and just being very happy with a guy who finishes the RB7 in PPR formats last year.
You could I'm trying to think of like Fantasy Pros Championship. You could get a guy like, let's say, start off your draft with either Travis Kelce or Jamar Chase, a premium pass catcher. And then when it comes back to you in the second round, you could grab a guy like Derrick Henry, you could grab a guy like Jalen Waddle, or even Mark Andrews. Like you could start off a draft with Chase, Andrews, and Stevenson. So you're getting a potential top 5 guy at all 3 of those positions. That's real. Maybe even a top 3 guy at all 3 of those positions too. I don't want to get carried away with Stevenson here, but there is a non-zero chance of that as well. A player that people were really excited about, and you know this because you play a lot of Dynasty, his rookie year was Najee Harris. And last year, I remember being in drafts where I outright tried to avoid taking him, even when the ADP would kind of nudge me one round. Nate, you should probably take Harris here, and then I'd pass on him, and then I get to the next round, and the ADP would be like, "All right, enough messing around here, take Harris," and then I would come back to the next round after I wouldn't take him, and then the ADP screaming at me like, "All right, what are you doing here? Take Harris," and it was in that point I'm like, "Okay, I'll grab a couple of shares of Harris." You know what? I was disappointed I did that. It wasn't great last year. And Najee Harris right now being drafted as running back 12 in the Fantasy Pros Championship at the 310. Now, the report is that the Steelers want to utilize the running game heavily this year. That makes sense with Pickett, obviously, running the show. And it also makes sense because they have not one, but 2 talented running backs in Pittsburgh in Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. My question to you is there too big of a disparity for the way FFPC drafters are handling these 2 players? I just said Najee Harris going on average as the 12th running back off the board, and his ADP is at 310, whereas Jalen Warren, running back 45 at the 1105, and a guy that should be working into the offense. We were concerned about Jalen Warren's impact last year, and he ended up making a pretty decent impact into the Pittsburgh running game. Could be even more so this year, and I feel like I'm still ignoring Harris here in the 3rd. But, man, I love me some Jalen Warren in the 11th.
I think Najee Harris is being drafted close to his ceiling, quite honestly, in this offense with Jalen Warren. Yeah. His rookie season was kind of an anomaly. He had almost 100 targets. We're not going to see that again, especially with Jalen Warren getting involved in this offense. If Jalen Warren is RB45, yes. I am more likely to have more shares of Jalen Warren than Najee Harris this year in these drafts because I love that value for a guy who might produce similar numbers to Najee Harris.
I want to look this up because if I remember correctly, wasn't the big knock on Harris after his rookie year of taking him early in drafts is that he was an accumulator back? Like he had so many, I mean, you just mentioned the catches, but he had so many carries as well. 307 carries 307. In his first year, 1,200 yards. And, oh, by the way, that average yards per carry was under 4. 7 touchdowns were, it's bizarre to see how how close his 2021 and 2022 seasons were when you take out the receiving aspect. He
Yes.
had 1,200 in 2021, 1,000 on the ground in 2022, 7 touchdowns in each one. He only had 35 more carries in 2021 than 2022, but 74 catches in 2021, only 41 in 2022.
Yep.
And that's the Jaylen Warren factor you're bringing up.
Oh, 100%. Jaylen Warren is a very talented pass catching back. Najee Harris probably continues to get the majority of the groundwork. We're not going to see another 94 target season for Najee Harris. And what that tells me is that his ceiling is in that probably RB12, well, probably RB10 to 14 range.
Mm-hmm.
I can see him sneaking into like the back end of the RB1 tier, but not really any higher than that. And I'm just not, it could be even worse. Because if Jaylen Warren really starts taking off in the rushing game, then we see him take a hit in carries, and then we're talking about a guy who's finishing RB20.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, just the other thing here too is like, not saying I would take, well, maybe I am saying I'd take these guys over Harris. I wouldn't have to in drafts if I really didn't want to, but like Joe Mixon's going behind Harris. I like Mixon better. I'm a big part of that is the Cincinnati offense just being so much more prolific than Pittsburgh. And then a couple of guys I've liked the last couple of years that I always think are undervalued, Travis Etienne and Aaron Jones, although they're going almost a full round after Najee Harris. So you might not even have to take those guys if you want a running back. The guys who are going around Harris are mostly receivers. Metcalf, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley's in there as well. What are your thoughts? Sell me on Calvin Ridley. I keep asking people to do this for me. I'm kind of out on him this year. Given, like, before I saw his ADP, when people were drafting him, I was like, okay, yeah, Ridley in Jacksonville, that makes some sense. And now I see him going in the mid-third, and I'm kind of like, dude hasn't played football in a year and a half. I don't know. I think there's better ways to spend a third-round pick, but so many people disagree with me.
So I've been taking him in the third round in drafts, and I'll tell you why. I was out on him because we didn't know a lot about the situation. We know he got suspended for gambling. Like, what an idiot! Like, and you weren't even playing hard before that, and blah blah blah. You're just injury prone. Like, what's going on here? Then I read his Players Tribune piece. Mm-hmm. And that really put a lot of perspective into what he went through in Atlanta and why the things that happened. I get it. I can't imagine going out on the field knowing that you can't perform 100%, but the team's telling you to play and giving you injections to make your ankle feel better when it's still, and then you're just doing more damage to it, right? Thus is the problem with medicine and professional sports at times. Yeah. So I understand. And now he's in Jacksonville. He's got Doug Peterson as his head coach. Everybody loves Doug Peterson. He's created a great culture in Jacksonville. We saw it really kind of take hold at the end of last season. That team got really good and got really cohesive. And I think Calvin Ridley still has a lot left in the tank. He's had some phenomenal seasons, and he was trapped in an offense with Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, and he still had a wide receiver one season. He doesn't have a ton of wear and tear. If you think about it, he hasn't played for a year and a half. He's had plenty of time to get familiar with the team. They acquired him at the trade deadline last season. So he's familiar with the playbook. He's familiar with the players. He's been a part of the team for, it'll be close to, like about 6 months now, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months. Geez, it's already now August.
Mm-hmm. It is. Time flies, man.
But so he's been with the team for 9 months. This isn't a Deshaun Watson situation where it's like, this dude's shady. He got a ridiculous contract. People are pissed off about it. There's just nastiness hanging around Deshaun Watson. That's not there with Calvin Ridley. And he's on a good team with a great quarterback that needs that marquee wide receiver. Christian Kirk is not that guy. Calvin Ridley can be that guy, which will elevate Christian Kirk ultimately because Ridley starts drawing that marquee coverage. It's a whole thing. But I think Calvin Ridley is the wide receiver one in this offense. And if this team does what we think they're going to do this season, that puts Calvin Ridley as possibly a top 5 wide receiver in 2023.
Now, while I agree with everything you said, especially from the mental health aspect, okay, and everything like that, I think comparing Watson and Ridley is irresponsible, right? But I'm going to do it anyway. Now, here's the comparison, and this is the thing that everything you said, I totally agree with. The one thing I can't get over with Ridley is the fact that this guy has not played meaningful NFL football since October 24th, 2021. Now, I saw that Deshaun Watson missed all this time. This is the comparison. Not a comparison what they're doing off the field. The comparison is how much time they missed. And I saw how rusty Watson was when he came back. I have no doubt that Ridley will play numerous more years in the league. My concern is, do I want to invest a third-round pick into a guy that has missed so much time. Not that I'm saying he can't get back to where he was. I think he can. But how fast that happens and whether it's this year and given the ADP, that's the issue I have with Ridley. But this does not seem to be a concern of yours, though.
So different coaching staffs as well.
Okay.
I trust Doug Peterson's won a Super Bowl. Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. Just get that out there, right? Wasn't the best. This Eagles team that went to the Super Bowl last season would have crushed that Eagles team that won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, totally.
Wouldn't even be close. Doug Peterson's a better coach. I think it's a better culture. I think it's a much better culture. And I think he's surrounded by more talent, better quarterback, better offensive line. The pressure isn't on him to perform. Whereas with Watson, it's like, okay, you're the quarterback now. You've got to do this. You've got to lead this team. Ridley gets to get on the field and catch balls. As long as he knows the offense and he's feeling 100%, he's had time to work with Trevor Lawrence. They've been working out together since like February. I think as long as that part is there, I'm not worried about him being rusty. I think with the wide receiver, it's different. You don't have to touch the ball on every play. Maybe the first week he only sees 3 or 4 targets, and that progresses to 5, to 6, to 7, to the point where we're seeing him get 8 to 10 targets a game in a pass-heavy offense.
So in on Ridley, out on Kirk, out or in on Evan Ingram?
I'm in on Evan Ingram.
Okay.
At his value, I think he's a steal.
And that's the story I was alluding to here. So it seems like the only Jaguar, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, the only Jaguar you're out on is Kirk, right?
I'm not fully out on Kirk. I think that Ridley becoming that elite wide receiver, getting back to being that elite wide receiver, opens Christian Kirk up because, again, he's not going to face that marquee quarterback on every snap. Depending on the value for him, I'm okay with taking Christian Kirk. I have a little bit of Kirk in a few drafts, some best ball drafts this year, just because. I mean, they could be dual 1,000-yard wide receivers.
They very well
with Trevor
could.
Lawrence.
Christian, beg your pardon, Calvin Ridley 310, Christian Kirk 512 in the ADP right now, which obviously makes Trevor Lawrence pretty tantalizing at the 701. And by the way, Evan Ingram at the 702. So that's you have 3, and we mentioned Travis Etienne going in the 4th round. It's a lot of skill position players surrounding Trevor Lawrence, makes him pretty valuable as well. We touched on the Bills with Dalton Kincaid earlier. I also want to talk about this. I think this is being underreported, and I think it's being underreacted to in high-stakes drafts. James Cook is seeing heavy work in the passing game throughout the first week of Bills training camp. Josh Allen had 12 completions 2 days ago in team drills. James Cook caught 5 of them. And to me, like, Josh Allen does not seem like the type of guy that wants to check down to running backs in practice. You know what I mean? So, and this is according to The Athletic. So I look at James Cook right now, man. As far as his ADP is going, Nate, you are looking at James Cook falling all the way to the mid-7th round as running back 28. Remember, no Devin Singletary there anymore. He does have to deal with Damian Harris. But we want the pass catchers, man. And Cook could be a big-time pass catcher for the Bills this year. Also, when you consider that Nyheim Hines is going to be out for the season too.
Yeah, I love James Cook. RB28, I'll take that all freaking day. Because what we kind of talked about earlier when we touched on the Buffalo offense is that this isn't a run-first offense. It's never going to be as long as Josh Allen is the quarterback. And they kind of signaled that by settling for Damian Harris, of all people, who he's an unexciting option in any offense to me. And like you said, James Cook, pass catching back. If this camp trend continues, he's going to fly up the board.
Yeah, he totally should. And that's the thing.
He should.
Like, these are the types of players that, like, when you consider that, 6th, 7th, 8th round, like players in this area, these are the guys that might make it on the field in the preseason. And we don't want them getting them on the field in the preseason because we don't want them to show what they can do. Right. And I think Cook is a perfect example that if he comes out in the first or second preseason game, he's in there for 2 series and he catches 3 balls for 40 yards and maybe, 5 carries for 30 yards or something like that. All of a sudden, he's not a 7th round pick anymore. He's moving up to like the mid 5th or maybe the early 5th. And that's what we don't want to see. I think James Cook is a hidden secret right now. He's trending in the right direction, Nate.
Oh, I love to see it. I've been a James Cook truther coming out of college. I loved him. He's one of probably.
Where did he go to college? Was he a Georgia guy?
Georgia.
Georgia.
He was
Okay.
Georgia.
Yeah, they never create good running backs there. So
not ever. And I understand that he's a little bit undersized, right?
Yeah.
He's not as big as his brother Dalvin, but dude, they have the same genes. Like, they were raised in the same household. They had the same skill set. So to think that he doesn't have a chance to be not necessarily an elite back, but like almost an Aaron Jones type back is silly, even at his size. He showed he can do it last season, and the offense and Josh Allen specifically started to trust him more. And when we saw that, he started to actually score some fantasy points. I think this team is happy with him. Let him keep going at RB28, and I'll keep taking him as my RB28. RB4, RB5.
Poor man's peak Aaron Jones, I think, is a good way of describing this season, for sure. Now, a guy who is not trending in the right direction. Alvin Kamara. Ian Rappaport tweeted out this week that Kamara is expected to be suspended by the NFL. Rappaport did not say a length of suspension. He said 3 lengths of suspension. He mentioned a 2-game, a 4-game, and a 6-game suspension. I think 6 games was always sort of like the worst case scenario that we were looking at for fantasy football drafts. And the question here too is, and I bring this up with everybody, Nate, like even if Kamara was not facing a suspension this year, like you saw what he did on the field last year. This is not a guy who is a young man anymore as far as NFL running backs go. And I think he started to show it a little bit last year. Then what did the Saints do? They went out, they got Jamal Williams, gave him a pretty decent contract, and they went out and they drafted Kendre Miller. A guy that I know, and I'll get your thoughts on Dynasty Kendre Miller as well. But these are guys that are competing with Kamara this year. Plus, he's going to be suspended. And if he is suspended and when he comes back, we don't know how long it's going to take for him to get up to speed again. And maybe he'll be behind Williams or Miller, or at the very minimum, be in a timeshare with Williams and Kendre Miller. 708, man, right now, running back 30. I'm kind of out on him. I think this could be a lost season for Kamara.
I think it was going to be a lost season, kind of regardless.
Yeah.
I think it was. I believe it was. I think it was 2 months ago. I wrote him up in overvalued players in FFPC drafts.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was actually for the FantasyPros tournament specifically. If you look at his numbers, so first of all, he's never rushed for over 1,000 yards his entire career. He has rushed for over 900 just one time. His targets have been down the last 2 seasons. His catches have been down the last 2 seasons. His touchdowns have been down the last 2 seasons. Now, in 2021, he was the PPR RB8, but in 2022, he slipped to 16, and that was playing in 15 games. You throw in a 6-game suspension, which that's where I feel like it's going to go. So he misses the first 6 games of the season. And then you toss in, you've got Williams there, you've got Jamal Williams there, and then the drafting of Kendre Miller, who I think is a very talented back who isn't bad out of the backfield catching passes. I mean, Jamal Williams does that. He did it more in Green Bay, didn't really do it in Detroit for obvious reasons. But that's something Jamal Williams can do, and people forget that. What this signals to me is that the team is seeing that Kamara is declining, and then the legal issues is a concern. The legal issues are a concern. So you have to look at what's our plan B. And I think they're starting to see that our plan B might be a better plan A. When Kamara comes back, he'll get light work, but I don't think we're going to see there's no way he sees 200 carries. Even if he plays the entire season, I don't care. He's not going to see 77 targets either. He might see 50. And if he misses 6 games, he might see 30. Or he might step back into an offense that's running really well with Derek Carr. Sorry, I'm trying to say that seriously. But if it does happen,
it could be.
It could happen.
Bite your tongue on the Derek Carr jokes.
I'm
and hate
sorry.
Tonight.
Derek Carr's fine.
He's fine.
But if Kamara steps back into an offense that's already running well, they're scoring points. Jamal Williams is scoring touchdowns. Kendre Miller's catching the ball out of the backfield. You're probably not going to get Kamara that heavily involved.
Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at basically a 3-way committee. If Dennis Allen's smart, I'm out on Kamara, and I don't really care what the value is at this point.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I don't think there is any. I don't think in the mid-7th round you can make a good case for, here's why Kamara is a good way to spend that resource. I don't think that's a good argument to be making right now. We're making plenty of good arguments. In fact, Nate, when we come back, is going to make his arguments on where he stands on certain players. Don't forget, the FFPC is the home of season-long fantasy football, 2 separate $1 million grand prizes in the FFPC main event and the FantasyPros Championship. Best ball leagues, dynasty leagues, the Terminator tournament, which is starting up. Live main events actually start tomorrow. I should mention that too. The FFPC weekly challenge will kick off once we get to the start of the season and more. If you use the promo code ALARM at myffpc.com for our exclusive offer and get $25 off your first FFPC entry of $35 or more. That's what you need to use. Promo code ALARM at myffpc.com. Promo code ALARM ALARM, myffpc.com. Jamal Williams, we just talked a little bit about him. We're going to talk a little bit more about him. DK Metcalf, TJ Hawkinson. These are all players that we will find out where Nate Polvogt from Fantasy Pros and Razzball stands on these players going forward for fantasy football drafts in the FFPC this year. I'm Eric Balkman. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show only on BSN.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
Better Sports Network. Collectible moments.
Everybody up here at U.S. Cellular. Sox 5 runs, 6 hits. The 2-1 to Bartlett. Swing shot to short. Ramirez has it, throws. Burley picks the perfect game. His second no-hitter. People going crazy here at U.S. Cellular. He's mobbed by his teammates. A perfecto.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right up, 1 second left. What a play by Bird. Bird stole the inbounding pass. Laid it up to DJ. DJ laid it up and in. And Boston has a 1-point lead with 1 second left.
Out of the I formation on first down. Peterson to carry, looking for running room on the right side, has it to the 25, across the 30, across the 35, and out of bounds at the 40-yard line. Adrian Peterson has just gone over 2,000 yards for the season, the 7th man in NFL history to cross the 2,000-yard mark.
Well, a thundering ovation for number 66, Mario Lemieux.
Just the emotion I'm sure Mario is feeling in this place. You don't appreciate something until it's gone, and it's so great to have Mario back.
Yager turns around. Over to Lemieux. Mario Lemieux, his first goal in his comeback here tonight at the Mellon Arena. And the Penguins lead 3-0, and he is smiling like a butcher's dog. Mario Lemieux.
Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. The Bears have scored, but the Bands are out on the field.
Pearson moves in front of the STP Dodge. Petty comes back to the inside. They almost touch as they move down low in the banking. They're going to be side by side as they exit the bank and head for the finish line.
Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? Pearson is still running. The winner is car number 21. An amazing finish. Richard Petty's car demolished in the front end, as well as car number 21. An unbelievable finish, a terrible crash. David Pearson has won the Daytona 500. Leitner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Leitner has hit the bucket at the buzzer! Pitched by Downey, swinging. There's a drive into left center field. That ball is going to be out of here. It's gone. It's 7-15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
The most valuable player is Magic Johnson. 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists. He starts at center, plays forward and guard, and leads the Los Angeles Lakers to a world championship 123-107 over Philadelphia.
Whether you collect sports memorabilia, fantasy championships, or winning bet slips, talk about it on Better Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Register for Dynasty Startup Drafts now at myffpc.com from the $100 level all the way up to the $5,000 level. We've been doing Dynasty for more than a decade, well over 1,400 plus leagues. Not a single one has ever folded ever. That's at myffpc.com. M like Mark, YFFPC.com. Nate Polvogt joining to me tonight on the HSFF show from Fantasy Pros on consignment from Razzball. So glad to have you on tonight. I know we got football going here. Do you have football on the second screen for the Jets and Browns?
No, man, I got stats. I'll rewatch the game. I've got Game Pass.
That was my next question is because sometimes I know people who don't watch preseason games purposely because they don't want those images and the things that they see with their own eyes because they don't watch everything. They don't want that skewing how they think about a certain player in their mind. Number one, how much preseason you watch? And number two, how much does the eye test factor into how you handle your fantasy teams?
So I don't watch a ton of preseason. If something notable happens in a game, I'll go back, I'll watch highlights, see what happened, see if maybe is this something I need to be paying attention to, or is this just a guy going off against a third string defense? I don't put a whole lot of weight into it. except for my own team, the Broncos. They're going to be amazing from what I've heard from camp. They're going to be the best team in football. So, but other than that, look, training camp's fine. And I don't really think the Broncos are going to be the best team in football. I wish. That would be amazing. Right. Broncos or Steelers, please.
I'll tell you this. So obviously anytime, it doesn't matter regardless of the team. Like it could be a total train wreck team this year. Think about the Arizona Cardinals and teams like that. Everybody is super positive this time of year. Hope springs eternal. You're going to get a lot of positive preseason stuff being put out by beat writers, which are great for giving us the information, not always the greatest for assessing the information of what it means for fantasy, even though I know some of them think that they're great at it. Not always the greatest. So I will point this out to you. My Packers, and I don't know where you stand on the Packers, but my Packers and your Broncos are two offenses that I think are being undervalued this year. I think everybody's got still that Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett stink on them from last year, and they want to stay away from Broncos. I think there's some fantasy value to be mined there. I just drafted Javonte Williams in a slow draft I'm in as my second running back a couple hours ago. And I like the Packers. Now, I don't think the Packers are going to be world beaters this year with Jordan Love, but I do think they're going to be competent. I think they're super talented. They're just super inexperienced. And I think that is represented in the way high-stakes drafters are playing the Packers offense. None of these guys, to me, are going very high. So I'm going to have shares of a lot of them and shares of your Broncos as well. Like Wilson this year, like Williams, Judy for sure. And then Sutton is another guy that nobody's talking about that I think let's touch on him a little bit and just talk about Cortland Sutton and the Broncos in general, the Broncos that you like for fantasy this year, Nate.
So I was really down on Cortland Sutton, and then the Tim Patrick injury happened, and then the KJ Hamler medical issue happened, and they released him. I'm still not super high on Cortland Sutton. I think that we see more of a bump for Marvin Mims. I think he gets into that slot role. I think they keep Judy outside because he excelled in that X role last season towards the back half of the season when they really moved him out of the slot for the most part. That's when he started scoring fantasy points. I believe Judy was wide receiver 5 from week 12 on. So in PPR, Jerry Judy's a guy I'm taking at cost right now. I think he's a fantastic value. About a month ago, the last time I did an FFPC mock, I got Judy in like the 11th round, I believe, which is an absolute steal for a guy that could finish as a top 10 wide receiver. I understand people sleeping on this Broncos offense, but there are a lot of things to like. If Javonte Williams comes back looking healthy, which I'm going to camp on the 8th, I'm going to be really interested to see how much pop he has in that knee and if he can really push off of it, if he's explosive. And if he is, you're getting him so cheap. You got him as your RB2. Yeah. This is a guy who we were talking about before the injury last season. He could be he had a chance to be the RB1. He was that talented. And there was that much hype behind him. I love getting Javonte that late. I also really like Samaje Perine. I think he's going to excel in this offense. People forget he has the all-time record for most rushing yards in a game in NCAA football. He rushed for almost 500 yards in a game.
And that was, by the way, the week after Melvin Gordon broke it, a record that stood for decades. And then Melvin Gordon broke it against Nebraska in the very next week. Samaje Perine for Oklahoma. I was so ticked off as a Badgers guy because Melvin Gordon did it in 3 quarters. That was the other thing, is that he didn't even play in the fourth quarter. And then Perine just crushed the record. I'm like, oh, that was a fun 7 days for Melvin Gordon having that record.
Well, I think what people aren't understanding is, okay, so Javonte's healthy, right? That was a brutal knee injury.
Yep.
The fact that he's running at full speed now is an absolute freaking Adrian Peterson miracle. But Sean Payton's not an idiot, and he likes 2 running back sets. Javonte is the better rushing back. Samaje, he's the better receiving back. And I'm not saying that Samaje Perine is going to be Alvin Kamara, but he's going to play that Alvin Kamara role in the Sean Payton offense. He's not as talented, or as far as we know, he's not as talented as Alvin Kamara. We haven't really seen him get a shot. But I think he's the pass catching back in this offense. And with that PPR value, I mean, maybe he's a back-end RB2, and we see Javonte as like a mid-range RB1 with the rushing upside, and he does catch the ball. There's a lot to like in this offense. I could seriously go on for days because I love Greg Dulcich too.
Okay, I want to talk to you about Dulcich, but the other thing with Williams is like, I can't. I mean, everybody's talking about how he just shredded his knee. It wasn't even just an ACL. There was a lot of other damage in there. And if you would have told me, Balky, what are the odds that he plays in preseason at all the following year? I said there's no way in hell he plays in the preseason. And now he's playing in the second preseason game, or at least so we've been told with Sean Payton. Well, actually, we have to see what happens when it gets down to it. But I'm flabbergasted by how he's rebounded from that injury, and obviously putting my money where my mouth is. I'm in on Javonte Williams because I still think he's going at a really good discount. I got him in it was obviously not an FFPC league, but it was a 12-team full PPR league. And you have to start 3 receivers in this format. But I got Javonte Williams in like the 6th round, like the early 6th round. So I'm still all aboard on that.
That's a smoking deal.
Greg Dulcich. What I've heard differing views than what you're saying right now. I heard he's not having a great camp. Is that true? Or why are you still believing in Dulcich this year?
Because I don't know how much camp really matters.
Okay.
In an instance with a guy like Dulcich, we saw what he could do last season when he was healthy, which he wasn't healthy for enough of it. In my opinion, I wish he had been around for at least like 8 games. We got 5 out of him, but we saw him play well. And I keep going back to this Nathaniel Hackett basically ruining this team last season. The clock management was poor. The play calling was absolute trash. Russell Wilson wasn't allowed to do what Russell Wilson does well and get out of the pocket and scramble. Their offensive line was beat up. Greg Dulcich, if he is healthy, is a top 12 tight end in 2023.
Wow.
In this offense, period.
I love it.
He plays more like wide receiver, and they brought in Adam Troutman to really handle a lot of the blocking duties because that's what he does best. Yeah. He's basically a 6th offensive lineman. They run 12 personnel. Dulcich is going to be the pass catcher. If they're running 11 personnel, he's probably the guy who's out on a route. He's probably lined up in the slot somewhere. I could be completely wrong, and we could see Albert O take a leap this year because football's crazy. But I see a window to Dulcich being a top 12 tight end, and I don't think it's that hard given the position and where he's going in drafts. What is he going? I think he's going, last I saw was like tight end 19, 20, somewhere in that range.
I don't know if it's
later than that.
Tight end for Okuwepano, are you talking about? Or Dulcich?
No, I was talking about Dulcich.
Dulcich is tight end 13. Right
so
now.
He's moved up a little bit.
He's moved up significantly at the 10:07, which is weird because I keep hearing reports like Dulcich not doing all that great at camp, which it's fine if you don't put a whole lot of stock in training camp. It's just weird because I know a lot of other people do. So to see him not fumble is and raise up is a little weird.
Well, if you look at Patrick and Hamler being gone, I mean, those are 2 guys that were expected to be fairly heavily involved in the passing game if healthy. Without them, I mean, they're not bringing in anyone new. So I think Dulcich, he almost has to have a role in this offense.
What was the other thing I wanted to ask you? You know what? We're running short of time, so I'm not going to worry about it. All right. I want to ask you where you stand on these guys for this season. And I'll tell you this too. If you're having a difficult time viewing your screen here at bettersports.com, it's because of all the flags that Nate Polvogt has planted tonight, be they on Greg Dulcich or Jonathan Taylor or Marvin Mims, Cortland Sutton. Who else did we plant the flag on? James Cook was another one tonight. Dalton Kincaid. I mean, it's all over the place. We're going to move those flags out of the way and ask you where you stand on a few of these players, led off by Derrick Henry right now. Nate Polvogt, who is being drafted at his ADP right now, running back 7 at the 208. Where do you stand on Henry at that price?
I love it. What's changed about this offense? They got DeAndre Hopkins. All that tells me is that they're not happy with Treylon Burks' progression because this is a 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end offense. You've got Chig Okonkwo, who I think is going to be phenomenal. We saw flashes of it at the end of last season. And then you've got DeAndre Hopkins, who's DeAndre Hopkins. He's older, so he's not full-on prime DeAndre Hopkins. But this isn't a team that's going to throw the ball a lot. And I don't care if it's Tannehill behind center or it's Levis behind center. And there's really no running back. They got Tyjae Spears. I mean, he's not going to compete for carries with Derrick. Nobody's going to compete with Derrick Henry.
No.
Nobody. He's an anomaly. He's an anomaly of a player. He's like an Adrian Peterson type anomaly where it's like, how is this guy still doing this? He's going to do it again this year. He's going to have 15, 16, 1,700 rushing yards. He's going to have another 300-something carries. He's going to have another 8 to 10 touchdowns. At 208, that is an absolute steal. And I want in.
In 2021, I feel like I drafted Derrick Henry. I'm like, this will be his last good year. And now he's still a 2nd-round pick in 2023. You never know. Piggyback on that, are you out based on this? You saying that this is a 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end offense. Are you out on Treylon Burks at the end of the 8th round in FantasyPros Championship drafts?
I want nothing to do with Treylon Burks this season.
And that makes sense based on how you're looking at this. We talked a little bit about Jamal Williams before, but it was more in regards to Kendry Miller and Alvin Kamara. Jamal Williams, let's look at him in a vacuum right now. Running back 40 at the 10:03. Place you want to be in business with Williams there. Where do you stand on Jamal Williams?
Well, that valuation is ridiculously low. Guy coming off a season where he led the league in touchdowns.
But touchdowns are fluky too, right?
They can be, unless a team's bringing you in because he scored 15 touchdowns last season. Dennis Allen is looking at this like, we haven't had a goal line running back presence on this team in a very long time.
Probably since Ingram,
not a reliable
right?
one. Probably since, Mark Ingram was probably the last one.
Yeah.
Look at what Mark Ingram did.
And the first stint of Mark Ingram, not the second stint.
Right. Well, the second stint was just bad.
Yeah.
But he's going to be the Mark Ingram guy in this offense, the Mark Ingram piece, if you will. Dennis Allen hasn't strayed much from the Sean Payton style offense because he's a defensive coordinator. Of course, he's just going to take what Payton gave him. That tells me that Jamal Williams is going to be the goal line guy. We could be in for 10 to 12 touchdowns. I don't think he's going to hit that 15.
Yeah.
But I think he also, with Kamara possibly out, if he gets involved a little bit in the passing game and he gets that little bit of PPR bump, he's a top 12 running back.
Yeah, that's true. And
I'm not planting my flag on that happening. I think that's his ceiling. It's like RB10.
But we're also talking about a guy who is being drafted in the 10th round. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like, he's not like, you could plant your flag on him if you want, but like, you don't have to,
Right.
At that
exactly.
price, it's just, why not?
It's a steal.
It is a steal for sure. Now here's an interesting guy. And I just saw the tweet come out. He is not playing tonight, along with most of the Jets skill position guys, except for Abanikanda. Garrett Wilson. I saw him get up into the late first round. I want to say, oh boy. Well, it was right before the NFL draft, I think, because Rodgers was on the team at that point. And I felt all offseason people were drafting Garrett Wilson as if Rodgers was already on the team. And then I did see him spike to the end of the first round. He's fallen a little bit, and I think this is more appropriate for his ADP. But you can get him as wide receiver 10 at the 204 right now. Nate, where do you stand on Garrett Wilson as the wide receiver 10 in the early second round?
I'm nervous, Eric. I'm really nervous because we know Aaron Rodgers is fickle. So if Garrett Wilson drops a couple passes in camp, he might never throw him the ball again. And I think we're
and he's got Lazard and Cobb there too to throw.
He's got Lazard. He's got Cobb. They brought in Mecole Hardman. They still have Corey Davis.
Mm-hmm.
They've got CJ Uzomah. They've got Jeremy Ruckert. I'm worried that Garrett Wilson isn't going to see the volume that he needs to live up to his ADP at this point. And I did actually write about him in my last overpriced players on FFPC for FantasyPros.
By the way, I'll just tell you right now, anytime you do one of those, it almost always goes in our FFPC newsletter that comes out after you write that. Almost always goes in there anytime you put something out there. So I know the Jamal Williams was in there earlier, and I think the Garrett Wilson one was in there as well.
Yeah, the talent's undeniable. But I think we're overvaluing Aaron Rodgers at 40 years old. Tom Brady did it, sure. But let's talk about guys who have fallen off a cliff sooner that were incredibly talented quarterbacks. Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan. I mean, really, honestly, Peyton Manning's last season was abominable. He limped into a Super Bowl. Didn't even get the team there. That had to be Brock Osweiler. Aaron Rodgers has had a phenomenal career. Love him or hate him, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that skill's left. He's used to operating in a very plodding offense. They would have the slowest pace of play in the entire league.
I think they're going to have a slow pace of play in New York too. It's just the way he does it, And
that's not going to be good for. It's not going to be good for Garrett Wilson.
No, it's going to be a lot horrible for plays. Yeah, absolutely.
I see Garrett Wilson finishing somewhere like wide receiver 15 to 18 in this offense because Rodgers is familiar with Allen Lazard. And Randall Cobb's not going to steal a ton of work from anybody in this offense, but he's a safety blanket for Aaron Rodgers. Garrett Wilson will get his. In Dynasty, I'm fine with holding on to him. I'm not trying to move him. But any other draft, I really don't want him at his current value because I don't think he's going to come close to living up to his ADP.
Yeah, and it's tough because when you consider if I'm going to take Garrett Wilson here at the 204, I'm passing on players like Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins. All these guys go after Wilson in drafts too. And I'm not saying I like all those guys better, but I like some of them better than Garrett Wilson there as well. DK Metcalf, another guy I just recently drafted yesterday in one of my slows. Wide receiver 16 at the 308. He's right between Calvin Ridley, who's right above him, and Keenan Allen, who's right behind him. Jackson Smith and Jigba obviously joining the fray this year as he's catching passes. Metcalf is from the comeback player of the year, and Geno Smith. What are your thoughts? Where do you stand on DK Metcalf in Seattle at the ADP of 308?
I'll take that all day. It's DK Metcalf. Yeah, they added Jackson Smith and Jigba. That's fine. That tells me they want to probably throw the ball a little bit more, maybe spread the ball out a little bit more. But DK Metcalf is the alpha receiver in this offense. And if you believe in Geno Smith, you have to believe in DK Metcalf. And I believe in Geno Smith. I think Geno Smith is a guy who finishes as a top 10 quarterback again this season. He's just getting into his own. Like, I feel like we're seeing Geno Smith at a weird, like, older prime of his career right now, because he never got a shot like he got in Seattle. He started out with a Jets team that was absolutely atrocious his rookie season, couldn't make it through as a starter all the way through his second season. But the Seattle offense is perfect for his skill set. And part of that is DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is a safety blanket. You can throw the ball up and you know DK is going to at least get his fingertips on it. He's not going to let the ball get picked off. He's still going to be Geno Smith's primary target this season. Jackson Smith and Jigba and Tyler Lockett, I love them, and I love them at their value, and I love DK Metcalf at his value as well, and I'm buying.
When you consider the JSN addition, do you view the Seattle passing offense as the pie just getting bigger for everybody because of that? And maybe people are unfairly penalizing Metcalf and Lockett because of the JSN addition?
Oh, 100%. I think people are penalizing them completely unfairly. Okay. I think Carroll look at Geno Smith's efficiency last season. He was completed almost 70% of his passes over the entire season. If you've got a quarterback that's that efficient, don't you want to throw the ball more?
No.
100% you want to throw the ball more. Yeah. So they brought in another talented receiver. They can spread the ball out and they can break up the coverage. Now an offense can't target just Metcalf and Lockett. They have to think about Jackson Smith and Jigba. That's going to break up coverage. It's going to make it easier for them to operate. And I think just overall, I think all three of them at their current value are really, really great picks.
I didn't plan it this way, but I'm just looking at this right now. The next guy on this list is TJ Hawkinson. And in the slow draft I'm in right now, I drafted him as my tight end too, Nate. So we're getting a lot of bulky flavor on the show tonight. Where do you stand on TJ Hawkinson in the Fantasy Pros tight end premium format at Fantasy Pros Championship? Tight end 3 at the 305. He is basically 10 picks behind Mark Andrews. He is going about 17 picks ahead of tight end 4, Darren Waller. Where do you stand on Hawkinson, man?
I'm passing on Andrews, knowing that I can get Hawkinson in the third round. Plain and simple, between two teams last season, he was second in tight end targets, only behind Travis Kelce. Of course, it was Kelce. But 80 of those targets came in Minnesota in 10 games. So he was averaging 8 targets a game. He had a 15-target game, and he had a 12-target game towards the end of the season. He had 10 targets in their playoff game, caught all 10 of them, even though Kirk Cousins couldn't figure out how to get the ball 7 yards down the field on that last play. Hawkinson is going to be a big part of this offense. And why wouldn't he be? He fits so well when they acquired him last season. This is a guy I think it could be the tight end 2. He was a tight end 2 last season. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any reason he can't be tight end 2 this year. I think the talent's there. And getting him in the third round, especially in tight end premium, that's just a steal.
And I think he fell because of Addison, because they added Addison in the draft, and people are freaking out over that. What kind of an impact do you think Addison has on Hawkinson now that Hawkinson has fallen to a mid-third round pick after the draft?
Absolutely none. KJ Osborne is someone that you should probably not look at, even as a late round flyer at this point with Addison, but it doesn't affect Hawkinson. People don't want to remember that Adam Thielen was there last season and Hawkinson still did fine.
That's true. That's a good point. And Thielen obviously was a lot more polished too than Addison, although he probably doesn't have the upside. It balances out. I don't know.
Sure.
All I know is that Cousins love throwing to Hawkinson. I still don't there's not, honest to God, but I think the Packers could finish last in the NFC North. I don't know if they will. In fact, I don't think they will, but I think they could. And they could have the best defense in that whole division. I think the Vikings and the Lions offenses are going to be great. They're going to put up a lot of points. And part of the reason is I don't think their defenses are very good, and they're going to get into a lot of shootouts, which is a good reason to have Vikings and Lions on your team, especially a guy who played for both those teams. last year, and that was TJ Hawkinson. Guy who plays on the Lions this year and last year is Jared Goff, and I think for that reason, I do like Goff this year. You look at the weapons: Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, who everybody is falling all over themselves right now, and maybe deservedly so. Jared Goff, quarterback 17 at the 1308. Where do you stand on Goff at that price? Is he a guy that you have to have as a backup quarterback? I don't know if I'd want him as my starter, or maybe I would. What do you think?
So Goff is a guy where I've been snatching up value earlier rounds, taking him as my QB1. He's not that far removed from a season where he was a legitimate MVP candidate, took his team to the Super Bowl. He had Todd Gurley in that backfield those 2 seasons where he played so well in LA. Then they had a committee, and Goff just wasn't the same. But to be honest, that team wasn't the same. It wasn't the same caliber as that team that went to the Super Bowl and lost. They dealt him. They got Matthew Stafford, sent him to an awful Lions team that almost made the playoffs last season and looked really good on the back half of the season doing it. And they just got him more weapons. Mm-hmm. They got him Sam Laporta, who I am incredibly high on in that offense, and they got him Jahmyr Gibbs. So they got him as Todd Gurley. Maybe in a combination, you've got Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. He was QB 10 last season. I think we see a similar performance out of him. Maybe he even creeps up a little bit with another year in this offense. I'm really high on the Lions. I love the team culture. I love Dan Campbell. And I think Jared Goff still has a lot in the tank. He's got a big arm. He's got Amon-Ra. Now he's got Laporta. They brought Marvin Jones back, which for fantasy is an impact play. Like, I don't want anything to do with Marvin Jones, but that's a locker room vet. And I think that only helps this team. If they can unlock Laporta, I mean, I really do believe that Goff could finish higher than QB 10 this year.
So it's so fascinating because we know this was a good tight end draft for rookies this past year. And I almost wonder if, you and I are both in on Kincaid and Laporta. We haven't talked about Michael Mayer yet, but that was a guy through most of the draft, pre-NFL draft season. A lot of people viewed as the number 1 tight end in the class. That guy could be big in Las Vegas without Darren Waller there anymore. I remain fairly high on Luke Musgrave as a late round flyer. I'm Team Musgrave over Team Kraft in Green Bay. I think Musgrave is he's going to have a couple of spike weeks. I think next year is going to be really the year of Musgrave. So I like him quite a bit. We could look back on 2023, Nate, as that was the year the argument of rookie tight ends always stink. That might be the year the narrative died. This might be it because all these guys could have big seasons this year.
Well, I like what you said about Mayer. And people, for some reason, seem to be sleeping on him, and I see him slipping in drafts. This isn't a team that has a lot of weapons outside of Devontae Adams. Mm-hmm. Unless you want to call Jacoby Myers a weapon, I choose not to because I don't think he really is. It's a guy who it took 2 seasons for him to score his first touchdown in the NFL when he was the marquee wide receiver in an offense. That's generally a bad sign. And I don't like Josh McDaniels as a coach, really, but I see the fit of Garoppolo. There's no more Waller left in this offense. And Mayer could be his Kittle. And we saw Garoppolo feed George Kittle. It's a lot to put on a rookie tight end because we see how that usually goes. Rookie tight ends take a couple years to really kind of start getting into an offense, getting involved, being valuable in fantasy. But again, like you said, I think this is a year where we look back, we're like, wow, that tight end class, that was incredible. Like, what a class it was. We've got 4 guys who are all in the top tier of tight ends in fantasy every season out of that class. I think Mayer could surprise a lot of people in that Raiders offense, as much as it pains me to say it as someone who lives in Denver. But isn't it funny how your hate kind of melts away once you get into this industry? It's like, well, yeah, fine. I'll draft Josh Jacobs. It's fine. 10 years ago, I never would have touched the guy in a draft just because he was a Raider. But it all goes away. And I think Mayer I like his value too. He's going after Laporta and Kincaid.
I almost wonder if there's, and this is just speculation on my part, but I almost wonder if there's something to be said when you're in a draft and you see Dalton Kincaid go and you're like, guess I won't have a rookie tight end this year. Then you just kind of forget about the other guys like Laporta and Mayer. And I don't know if that's certainly true for some people. I don't know how many people it's true for, but I think that plays into it as well in FantasyPros Championship drafts, FFPC drafts, whatever you have. Whatever we're talking about tonight, which is plenty of FFPC fantasy football. As a reminder, new users to the FFPC will get $25 off their first FFPC entry of $35 or more. Just use promo code ALARM at myffpc.com. ALARM, alarm at myffpc.com. We're going to finish up strong. We got another segment left in the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about when you're playing for $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship, who are some of the players to be targeting? Who are some of the players that you don't want on your team? I got a list of them. We're going to go through it with Fantasy Pros and Razzball's Nate Polvogt here on the show tonight. I'm Eric Balkman. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
So let's get into some best ball philosophy here.
Yeah.
In your experience, going back many, many, many years, drafting in national tournaments, Bradley, have you historically been shying away from the running back position in favor of wide receivers? In favor of, if you're drafting in the FFPC tight end premium format, in favor of tight ends as well. Is that the smart play when you're drafting this early in the drafting season?
Yeah, so taking value is going to be huge, and looking at like running backs and wide receivers, like you want to take a look at how the structure is. So you mentioned earlier the FFPC has a couple different types, like they've got super flex and one quarterback, and so that's going to change your strategy a little bit if you have only 2 wide receivers or if you're drafting 3 wide receivers. And of course, the PPR is a different aspect compared to other formats or other tournaments. And so keeping in mind the pass catching upside of some of the running backs may be more valuable in those formats. So the Austin Eckler's, the Christian McCaffrey's may be more value because they get more receptions, and so like I loved taking late shots a couple years ago on like the JD McKissicks of the world who would get 50 receptions really cheaply. So that's something to consider. But when it comes to like overall value, like you're drafting, you're in the middle of a draft, and you just noticed that, I don't know, maybe it's Chris Godwin has fallen 14 spots, but Chris Godwin was not in your plans to be drafting. Like maybe you don't have a strong player take on Chris Godwin, or my take is that I don't think the Bucs are going to be particularly good this year. But for him to be dropping, let's say 14 spots is more than a full round. And based on the data that we've seen, if you get to draft a player more than 12 spots ahead or behind ADP, so they drop 12 or more spots, you have an 84% edge over the rest of the tournament players who are drafting this player. Because typically this player isn't going to drop. The average draft position is a really strong indicator of where a player is going to go. And I think that is also on the flip side. If you are reaching too much, you're giving up value in your drafts. And so when it comes to value-based drafting, you need to consider, just because this guy isn't my plans or I don't have a strong player take on him, maybe that's your opportunity to sprinkle in some shares of this player at a good price.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Thanks so much for spending your Thursday evening with us. We certainly appreciate it. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He is Nate Polvogt from Fantasy Pros, as well as Razzball. We are kicking it live until 9 o'clock Eastern tonight, in which case after that, Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds will take over your eyes and your ears as we take you on Fantasy Football Night in America here on the Better Sports Network. I've been talking a lot during the show tonight. The FFPC, for the first time ever, and I've been with the company since 2008 during its inception, this is the first time that we've ever offered 2 separate $1 million grand prizes. This is season-long fantasy football. Both of these formats are managed leagues, and what you can do right now is win $1 million in the FFPC main event. It's our flagship event. Live drafts kick off tomorrow. We've had slow drafts basically since when did they start? Probably about 2 weeks or so ago. But the live drafts start off tomorrow night. You can win $1 million in that. Become an FFPC millionaire this year. You can also win the Fantasy Pros Championship, which also pays $1 million for the first time ever this year. And that's just $350 to enter. And if you want to enter in a 3-pack, we're going to give you a discount of $50 on that third team. So you can enter in 3 teams for $1,000 and you can have 3 swings at this $1 million grand prize. Both of them registered for at myffpc.com, where we make millionaires. The Fantasy Pros Championship drafts are always fun. Start one quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, a kicker, a defense, and 2 flexes. And I think that makes for some interesting team constructions. We're going to help you with that team construction right now with Nate Polvogt. Nate, I got to ask you, I was going to bring this up last segment, but I know we were talking about Josh Jacobs this one. We talked about Waller. We talked about Myers. We talked about Adams. What about Josh Jacobs right now for the Las Vegas Raiders? When you consider that this dude, I think, has always stood more of a chance to sit out the season, more of a chance than Barkley or any of these other running backs go, like Taylor or whoever. But Josh Jacobs has now fallen in drafts to the running back 11 at the 306. This after leading the league in rushing last year. Is he a target or is he a fade for you at 306 when you're trying to win $1 million?
Still a fade. There's too much uncertainty in what's going on in Las Vegas. And really the timing of him bouncing right after that Zoom call with all the top running backs that Austin Eckler had set up. The next day, he's just like, I'm out. I'm leaving. Don't know when I'll be back. So that makes me nervous. It makes me nervous that he's not going to play. From Josh McDaniels' Denver days, I've never really believed he created a good locker room culture as a head coach, because he certainly didn't here. And it doesn't sound like he's done a great job of that in Vegas as well. Things that players have said upon exiting from last season. I don't think Josh Jacobs comes back. I think he says, trade me, and they're not going to trade him. So he sits. So I don't care unless he's falling to like the 19th round. I'm not touching him.
Wow.
There's
okay.
way too much risk involved.
All right. So then how high would you take a guy like Zamir White? Is he moving up your boards? And by the way, Zamir White in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now is he's not free, but he's going at the 1306, 52nd running back off the board.
I'd be okay with that. I'd be 100% okay with that. Even if Josh Jacobs does play, I still think Zamir White gets more involved in this offense because they really have to get him more involved in this offense for Josh Jacobs' sake if he comes back. So I'm okay with that. 13th round, running back, what'd you say, 56? Yeah. Okay. 52. Still, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Nate, what about in a dynasty league with Josh Jacobs? If one of the better teams in your league comes up to you and said, hey, we're going to give you our number 1 pick in the rookie draft next year for Josh Jacobs. No strings attached. These are the only 2 components in the deal. What do you do?
I take it.
Wow, it's first rounder for Josh Jacobs right now. And it should be a late first rounder too. Okay. So you are down on Josh Jacobs. He is a favorite, which is fine. It's just fine.
He's talented. I love the talent. Obviously, he was the RB1 last season. There's just too much uncertainty.
What about Alexander Madison? And I think this is a guy, I think I know how you're going to answer this. But Madison in Minnesota, no Dalvin Cook there anymore. And I know, now who did they sign today? Abram Smith, I think. I saw before we went on air. Abram Smith is now Minnesota Viking. They still had Ty Chandler, Dwayne McBride, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you have Alexander Madison, running back 21 at the 603. Tell the listeners why you're out on him at that point.
Well, we haven't seen a ton of Alexander Madison, right? Mm-hmm. He's played a few times. He's played decently, but he played decently against poor defenses. So why would I be excited about him? All it tells me is that they're not going to run the ball as much. They went out and they got Jordan. Yeah. Kirk Cousins has a good arm. Love him or hate him, he might be the most vanilla player in the league. We haven't finished quarterback yet, so I don't know how vanilla exactly. But I've been told I'm going to fall in love with him. We'll see. There's just nothing about Alexander Madison that excites me. I think that we're all thinking, oh, he's going to be Dalvin Cook, and oh, he popped a few times the last couple of seasons when Dalvin was hurt. I'm just not that excited about him. I think he's being drafted above his ceiling at this point.
Yeah, 6th round. I could see that. I could definitely see that. More than a few Packers fans have told, because I have not watched quarterback yet. More than a few Packers fans have told me I got to stop watching quarterback because I'm starting to like Kirk Cousins. Like, I don't know if that's an endorsement to see it or if it's an endorsement not to see it, but I haven't yet. We'll see what happens there. Keep it on the running back tip here. Tony Pollard, my co-host and the guy who's co-hosted this show with me, FFPC player Dave Tripoli. We're actually doing a show with him this week where he's drafting a live Fantasy Pros Championship team. It's going to be very exciting. And he said last year that if there was no Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard would be a slam dunk top 5 overall player for him this year. As of right now, Elliott is still not on the team. And while Pollard is not in the top 5 overall in the Fantasy Pros Championship ADP, he has creeped up to running back 6 at the 205. Is he a target or a fade for you at that point in your draft?
I'm nervous about the volume. I'm nervous that people are expecting him to assume full-on RB1 duties with Zeke gone. I don't think Tony Pollard's that kind of back. I think he played at his ceiling last season, even without Ezekiel Elliott around, which I wouldn't be surprised to see them bring Zeke back on a much cheaper deal.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be kind of what Jerry Jones was thinking in releasing him. Like, there's going to be a huge market for this dude. Let him test it. He'll come back, sign a cheaper deal. I like Pollard as like RB 10 to 14, probably somewhere in that range this season. I'm not taking him at RB 6. There are guys I would just much rather have ahead of him at that value. I don't see it happening. Could it? I could be totally wrong. You know, as analysts, sometimes every once in a while we get things wrong. But no, an RB6 is too rich for me right now.
I think one of the things that makes Pollard great, or one of the things that made him so great, was how efficient he was with his touches. And I wonder if he does get this added workload, if all of a sudden that efficiency takes a step back and he's actually doing less with more this year. That's the concern I have with Pollard. Not necessarily about the volume, because I think there's still, it might actually be like, you know what actually would be a great, if you're looking at Tony Pollard, is if Elliott signs there, or if Fournette signs there, or some of these other guys, because I think then the bottom will drop out on Pollard and there'll be a buying opportunity for about a week and a half or so. And then all of a sudden people are like, wait a minute, why do we care about they signed Elliott? Pollard was great last year with Elliott, and then he goes back up again. But I think like that's the little sweet spot that you should be hoping for with Tony Pollard this year. But as it stands right now, yeah, I'm with you. I'm a little bit nervous about it. Devontae Smith, one of the most elite offenses in the NFL, features both A.J. Brown and Smith on the outside. Devontae Smith is being drafted currently in the FantasyPros Championship as wide receiver 13 at the 211. A.J. Brown's wide receiver 8 at the 201. So these guys are both going in the second round on average. Is Devontae Smith a nice target for you there, or would you be fading him in favor of somebody else?
No, I love him there. Devontae Smith is in what you said, the most dynamic offense, one of the most powerful offenses in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes bested him in the Super Bowl because it's Patrick Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
Any other team in the AFC, they would have crushed in that game. Absolutely crushed. And nothing's changed. They basically got the same offensive line. They've got the same receiving core. They lost their offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen, but I'm really not that worried about that. I think Nick Sirianni has his hands deep enough in that offense that they're going to be just fine. Then they went out and they got DeAndre Swift. So this offense just got better. You might worry a little bit about the volume dipping with the addition of DeAndre Swift, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think they're going to use Swift as much as everybody's expecting, so I'm kind of a little bit down on him, on DeAndre Swift, but not on Devontae. Devontae's he's going to have another phenomenal season, and I would take him as the wide receiver 11 all day.
I was actually
wide receiver 13 all day.
Regarding Swift, when you bring that up, I was actually hoping in one of my slow drafts that I was in, where I told you I took Javonte Williams, I was hoping the guy before me didn't take Williams, because then I was going to be in a conundrum. Like, do I have to, because I only have one running back on my roster. I'm like, God, do I take Swift here? I don't know if I should, because the concerns with the Eagles backfield is that it is the Eagles backfield, and they usually use a big time committee approach. And Swift is there, Penny's there. I love Kenneth Gainwell late. In fact, I'd be gobbling him up in a lot of drafts right now, because he's going towards the end of drafts, and Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift, no strangers to the trainers table over the course of their career, which makes Gainwell very valuable. So you like Smith, Devontae Smith at the end of the second round. I can get on board with that. We talked a little bit about Mark Andrews and the Ravens pass catchers earlier in the program. Tight end 2 at the 207. Mark Andrews, you believe, leads the Ravens in targets, so I would assume that he is a target for you in the tight end premium format of the FantasyPros Championship in the mid-second round.
Oh, 100%. That's a no-brainer. You take Mark Andrews in the middle of the second round in this format. Because again, like you referenced, I think he's going to lead the team in targets. There's a little bit more competition, obviously, but he's still going to lead the team in targets. We might see a little bit of a downtick in his volume, but I don't think it's going to be enough to be worried about it. I still think he's either tight end 2 or tight end 3 this season. I don't know who else is going to compete with those 3 at the top.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like there is TJ Hawkinson goes off the board at the 305, and then you basically have to wait about a round and a half for the next batch of tight ends, and that's Waller, Kittle, Pitts, and Goddard there. Where do you stand on Dallas Goedert, by the way? We talked about how prolific the Eagles' offense was. Dallas Goedert at the 506, bearing in mind that he might be the third, potentially fourth option on that team in the passing offense.
I'm okay with it. I think Dallas Goedert's still going to get his. And again, the tight end position is so thin for fantasy football.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw volume last season in essentially the same offense. So I'm okay with it. I think he's probably still a top 5 tight end.
Is Justin Herbert a top 5 quarterback? I think that's the question we should be asking right now. He's being drafted as the 6th quarterback off the board at the 506 in the Fantasy Pros Championship, a single quarterback start league. He is between Burrow. He is between Fields. Who was I talking with the other day? I was talking with somebody, and I said, you know what? I could kind of see Herbert catching Burrow and moving into being the 5th quarterback off the board in the Fantasy Pros Championship because of the injury to Burrow, and I think people would be a little bit less likely to take him in the early 5th round where he had been going. But Herbert is a guy that I think it's just wheels up for him this year, man. Like, he gets Kellen Moore. They added a first-round pick receiver in Quentin Johnston for him to throw to. I love Gerald Everett last year. I like him again this year. Williams and Allen, I think, are due for big seasons as well. And then they have Austin Eckler in the backfield. I mean, this is as high-powered of an offense as you're going to see anywhere. Kansas City, Philadelphia, they're right up with those two teams as well. And then when you look at a player like Herbert here, the signal caller, the guy who's leading the charge, I think there are a lot worse ways to spend a mid-5th round draft pick than Herbert. So I'm in on him there as a target.
I am as well. I love that you referenced Kellen Moore being the OC there. And something that made me really excited was reading an interview with Mike McCarthy where he said, Kellen Moore's a great offensive coordinator, but he's a kid. He just wants to air it out. But that's not how we do it here. We run the ball. We keep the ball on the ground. And that tells me that Kellen Moore is going to air the ball out. He
wasn't unemployed long, was he? When Dallas decided to, he got scooped up by the Chargers pretty darn quick.
Well, way better option than who they had last year, Joe Lombardi.
Yeah.
He just made a mess of that offense. I'm really excited about Kellen Moore running this offense, and I'm really excited about Justin Herbert.
And Herbert was playing hurt a lot last year too, which he's recovered from this year, which is another thing to keep in mind.
And they beefed up their offensive line, so he's going to have more protection. I'm kind of high on most of this offense this season, even against my better judgment, Gerald Everett.
What now? Why do you say against your better judgment? What don't you like about Gerald Everett? Or what?
Every time I've drafted him, he's burned me. He's just been so mediocre. Okay. And so if I draft him this year, he's guaranteed to be mediocre.
Let's get back to Dallas here for a second, because I know what you're talking about with the McCarthy thing. And I thought I had a chuckle when I heard that as well, because this is a guy that was in Green Bay for years and basically got run out of town by his quarterback because of his stubbornness and his unwillingness to change. And as Brad Pitt, as Billy Beane and Moneyball would say, adapt or die. Well, Mike McCarthy chose to have his career in Green Bay die rather than adapt. And then he spends the year off with, working with all these other former NFL head coaches, and they're trying to get up on what the kids are doing in the NFL, right? And trying to figure that out. And then what happens? He gets to work with a kid in Kellen Moore. Cowboys offense is really good when everybody's healthy last year. And then he decides to part ways with him, making it seem like Kellen Moore, he's kind of a joke because he just wants to pass all the time. And then they hire, who was the guy they hired there? Was it Schottenheimer? Brian Schottenheimer?
It was Brian Schottenheimer.
Yeah. Where running the ball is a good alternative to running the ball. Are we actually overvaluing guys like CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup and I guess not Jake Ferguson because he's going so late, but Dak Prescott? Because this could be a really slow, grinded out offense in Dallas this year, which might hurt those 3 receivers. And I know everybody always says, we want to run the ball. We got to run the ball. But saying that and doing that are 2 different things as well. A lot of things to consider here.
Well, we've seen McCarthy just run the ball. So I see no reason why that's going to change. I haven't really been as high on CeeDee Lamb as most. The talent's there, but it's the situation. I think there's a cap on what he can do in the Cowboys offense. I was talking about in February on a player profiler show that I really believe that Amon-Ra needed to be ahead of CeeDee Lamb in dynasty wide receiver rankings. Mm-hmm. And I still believe that. I love the talent. I don't love the offense. I don't love the quarterback. Dak Prescott, great person. I just think he's kind of a middle of the road quarterback. Michael Gallup's Michael Gallup. I'm just not that excited about this Dallas offense. Outside of Tony Pollard, you can get me a little bit excited there. That's about as far as it goes for me.
Get our viewers excited about what you're doing for Razzball with the Dynasty Diehards and then Fantasy Pros, because everybody after this show wants to know, because we got to sign off here in a couple of minutes. Everybody wants to know where they can get more of Nate Polvogt content, Nate.
Well, you can find Dynasty Diehards every Wednesday at 6 p.m. We're going to be transitioning to a waiver wire show called Waiver Wise for the season, where we're going to talk about guys that didn't get picked up on your waiver wire that you can maybe get for free later in the week. So we're going to kind of look at that across tons of different platforms. You can also find my writing on Fantasy Pros. I write all off season. I should have a weekly this season. Not sure what it's going to be yet. We haven't gotten that far in the planning stages. And then also, I just took over as the director of YouTube content for Fantasy Face Off. So that's kind of exciting. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming out. We're really ramping up our schedule for the season. So that's where you can find me. I'm all over the place. Really.
You definitely are all over the place. When does the podcast come out? When does the show come out?
So the show comes out, we're live at 6 p.m. on Wednesdays Eastern, and then we drop it as a podcast on Friday.
Got it. Okay. All right.
And you can find that. You can find an article that sums it up on razzball.com.
Perfect. And how long have you been you've been with Razzball for a while, right?
We're getting close to a year. My wife's actually been with them longer. She's the managing editor.
Okay.
So,
I don't know why I thought you had been there longer than a year. I felt like it was longer than that, but it's no matter. How did you actually get into the business? Just curiously.
Pandemic happened. My wife and I had been talking about doing a football podcast for like a good decade. Saw a tweet on Twitter asking for writers for In Between Media. Outside of my character, I was like, I'm going to respond to this guy. And there you go. 3 years later, almost to the day, just kind of wormed my way in, made people like me and pay me.
Good for you. That's awesome, Nate.
It helps to have a wife who's in the industry as well. She's a senior editor for Fantasy Pros, and she's the managing editor at Razzball. So
I got it.
She's in the thick of it with me, so she doesn't get mad at me for watching football.
Now she's not. Is she? You don't have to answer to her. Is she your boss?
Not kind of with Razzball. She edits all my stuff at Razzball. She ends up editing a lot of my stuff at Fantasy Pros too. But it's kind of nice to have her sitting next to me and be like, "You need to fix this.
Yeah.
Don't do this again." So it's really honed my writing.
That's good. That's good. Behind every great man is a great woman. Obviously,
100%.
True for you. True for me as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, live here on the Better Sports Network. He is Nate Polvogt. Remember to follow him on Twitter at Nate Polvogt, and actually check out the podcast, the Dynasty Diehards. And then it's going to transform into the
called Waiver Wise.
Waiver Wise. Sorry. Waiver Wise. That's going to happen as well. So check out that Wednesday nights and then Fridays, anywhere you get podcasts. I want to thank Nate. I want to thank Anthony Rivera, our producer tonight. We're back at 7/6 Central next week. Tom Strachan from the Fantasy Sanctuary and Fantasy Pros is going to join us for another Fantasy Pros Championship discussion. If you want to win $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship, make sure you're doing so at myffpc.com. Register now. We got drafts filling up every single day. And, of course, the FFPC main event live drafts start tomorrow as well. Dynasty Fantasy Football, myffpc.com is where to go for that. And for Dynasty content, Dynasty Nerds and Garrett Price are up next right here on the Better Sports Network.